The Louis Burke Frumkes Center for Writing and Culture at Hunter College presents 10 years of best-selling authors and great thinkers.
I'm Louis Frumkes, director of the Hunter College Writing Center, and we are gathered this evening to hear Lawrence Block, our last best-selling author for the 2016 series. Larry may be the last speaker this season, but he is certainly not the least in any sense of the word. Stuart Woods, a major best-selling author himself, once told me he learned everything he knows from Lawrence Block. And Ben Cheever told me after I had seated his son, John Cheever Jr., next to Larry at a party, that it was the greatest thrill of young John's life to have been able to sit next to Larry Block. It could be because Larry is a Grand Master of Mystery Writers of America and a past president of the Mystery Writers of America and the Private Eye Writers of America, or that he has won the Edgar and Seamus Awards 4 times each, and the Japanese Maltese Falcon Award twice, as well as the Nero Wolfe and Philip Marlowe Awards, a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Private Eye Writers of America, and the Diamond Dagger for Life Achievement from the British Crime Writers Association, or that he has won comparable awards in France and Germany, Australia, Italy, New Zealand, Spain, and Taiwan, or that Cece McNair, a mystery writer herself who is here tonight, flew in special from France to hear Larry, or perhaps it is just that Larry has written over 100 books, Kellar books and Tanner books and Bernie Rodenbar books, standalones and novel series, stories, nonfiction, hitman books and writing books. You name it, Larry has written it, and without exception, his books are loved by everyone. Besides that, Larry is brilliant, funny, and a dear friend whom I have known and laughed with ever since he asked me to introduce him as Larry Higgins Clark when he and Mary and Carol were on a mystery panel together that I was running 150 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, the inimitable Lawrence Block. No, you can have that too. Either one works. Either one works.
Either one works? All right. Can you all hear me? Oh, good. Thanks for coming. I'm glad to be here. And now I have to figure out what to talk about. Let me get some sort of sense of the house. How many of you have read some of my fiction? Okay, quite a few. How many of you are writers yourselves? Again, quite a few. Okay. That doesn't leave me any closer to knowing what to talk about, but it looks as though I have your interests at heart.
How many of us have been detectives or hitmen?
Sorry?
How many of us have been detectives or hitmen?
Oh, no, that I can tell just by looking at you. Okay, I'll talk for a while and then we'll have a Q&A, which should be good, but I think I'll start by answering some of the questions that, or responding to some of the questions that I don't want you to ask at the Q&A. And questions that I invariably get are you going to write another book about Bernie Rodenbar? Are you going to write another book about Matthew Scudder? Are you going to write another book about da-da-da-da-da-da-da? And the answer comes in 2 parts. 1, I don't know. And 2, if I knew, I wouldn't tell you. And that actually, at this stage in life, the simple question, are you going to write another book, even if you stop right there, I would have trouble answering it with any degree of certainty, you know. I consider it an enormous act of faith to buy green bananas. Given that, but also I will talk a little bit about series characters and the nature of the relationship that one develops with them. As a writer anyway, it's up to you to decide what the relationship you develop with them as a reader. I've reached a point in all of the series where I feel I'm probably complete with the characters. But I've had this perception before, and I've turned out to be mistaken. So it's certainly not an absolute given. With Matthew Scudder, after the 5th book in the series, which was 8 Million Ways to Die, I thought I was probably done writing about Matthew Scudder. Because although each of the 5 books was a novel in and of itself, in another sense, the 5 books comprised a sort of uber novel with its own arc, which concludes with Scudder, spoiler alert, coming to terms with his alcoholism at the end of 8 Million Ways to Die. And I thought that was excellent for him, but clearly problematic for me, because at this point, I figured I was probably done writing about him. I figured that his Detra had lost its raison, if you will. That it was, he'd had a fundamental catharsis, that in fiction at least, one catharsis is generally enough for a character, and that I was probably done. And I was for quite a while. Shortly, not too long after that, a couple of years later, I wrote a book called When the Sacred Gin Mill Closes, but that was a flashback novel. That was a prequel, if you will. So it didn't advance the story, and I couldn't do more books like that to follow it, or we just have, this fellow going on book after book about the way things used to be back when he was drinking, and we've met guys like that. We don't need to read it. So I thought I was done, and nothing changed except that some time passed, and it came to me that I could write another book about him. And I've gone on over the years with space in between at various points where I felt I was probably complete with the character. At this point, it would surprise me if I had anything more to write about Matthew Scudder, but as I said, I've been surprised before, so I'm open to the possibility. So with Bernie Rodenbart, also with Matthew Scudder, a very real problem in practical terms is that I think he's aged out of the business. He's over 75 now. I think he's about 76 or 77 at this point. And that's a little long in the tooth to be the lead character in an adventure novel or anything of the sort. Now, I can't quite see him as some version of either Ironsides or Nero Wolfe, confined to quarters or a wheelchair or something of the sort. And I don't know. I don't know whether there will be more or not. With Bernie Rodenbart, it's a different situation because he's what one might call a static character in that he stays the same unspecified age forever. Which, if you get your choice, that's who to be, That's much better. I made the mistake with both Matthew Scudder and in my own life of aging in real time. And that's a hell of an enterprise. But Bernie did not make this mistake. The problem there is that I've done it enough times so that I don't know that I can do many variations on that theme anymore. But we'll see. Again, there have been hiatuses in the series, and I've gone back to it. But more to the point, I don't know what I'll do next. I never know what I'll do next. I don't see why my career should have any more planning or forethought or purpose in it than the rest of my life has. That doesn't seem that it ought to be a requirement. And if I knew, I wouldn't tell you, because I don't talk about work until it's written. And I surprise myself, and it's interesting the way things happen. For example, I went to BoucherCon, which is a conference of mystery writers and readers and such, and it's held in a different city every year. And this past October, it was held in Raleigh. And I was on the train coming back from Raleigh. And I don't remember what I was thinking about, but what came to me was a story I'd heard a fellow tell out of his own experience at least 30 years ago, and no, I think at least 35 years ago, come to think of it. He was not someone I really knew. I remember that his name was Mac, and that he was tall, and that's all I recall about him. And he talked about how one time he woke up after a night of heavy drinking with no real memory of how the evening had ended, but just a feeling of foreboding and dread about the whole thing that bothered him so much that he immediately packed all his stuff into a suitcase, walked down to the bus station, left town, and never went back there again. You know, and he doesn't know that he did anything wrong or disgraced himself or anything else, but he just realized he wasn't that attached to the town where he was living, that he could get as good a job somewhere else as where he was, and he wanted to get the hell out of there and not think about it. And somehow or other, I never thought of it as something to write about, but somehow or other that stayed with me all the time, and I'm sitting on the train and I'm thinking about that, and I thought, you know, that'd make a good short story, starting out that way. And I figured, about 3,000, 3,500 word short story, that would do it. I had something to do in the meantime. I was rewriting, or revising and expanding a book I'd done back in the late 70s, a book called Writing the Novel from Plot to Print, and it had stayed in print continuously since 1979. But someone had gently pointed out that there was a lot that was not in it now, because the world had gone on, even though the book had stayed the same. And I had to agree with that, and I wound up expanding this from 60,000 words to a little over 90,000, so it's 1.5 times the length that it had been. I'll talk about it later. But I was working on that, and I had the use of an office. Some friends of mine were running a show called Billions, which you may have seen on Showtime, and they were preparing that, and they'd had a suite of offices for that purpose. And I was talking to them about wanting to go somewhere and write, and they said, would you like one of our offices? We've got one more room than we have any use for, and right now all we're doing is storing David's bicycle in it. So I started going there, and when I finished the book, they still had the office available. So I went there, continued to go there daily, and I started writing the short story that was supposed to be 3,000 words, and that wound up about 22,000 words. Because one thing led to another, and there was more of a story there than I knew when I started out. And it worked very, very well. You know, I wound up publishing it online as a Kindle single, And Subterranean Press is going to be bringing it out as a hardcover trade and limited edition. And all because I remembered something that had struck a chord with me, that had resonated in a particular way 35 years earlier, and that I was able to figure out where to go with it, you know. So this is a business that is always surprising to me, which may explain, well, it's not the only explanation, it's one explanation for why I'm still doing this at this advanced age. The other explanations, of course, are ego and avarice, which are the two central motivators in my experience. But I find writing a very engaging occupation. And nowadays, it's someone asked me the other day, is it harder or easier? And I don't really know the answer to that. I don't really know that that's a valid question. Certainly for me, writing is always the same degree of difficult, because if it's ever easy, you're not doing it right. You're not calling up everything that you bring to the party. But is the whole field harder or easier? I don't know how to answer that, because it's so enormously different. I don't know how many of you are aware of the whole world of self-publishing. It's, I think, an extraordinary game changer, and part of a whole changing publishing world, which is going in directions that are impossible to guess at or to assess, really. And if anyone tells you this is what it's going to be like 2 years from now, stop listening right there, because he doesn't know what he's talking about, because no one can say that, because nobody knows. It's unknowable. And you see various things happen in this way. It's also an unfortunate truth that there are lots of people in important positions who don't necessarily know what's going on, but have the courage of their ignorance. It's my belief, for example, that by and large, the mainstream publishers don't have a clue as to how to sell ebooks and are not much interested in selling ebooks. And you can tell that from the price, which will be, in some instances, higher than their hardcover cover books list price, and all of this, and they'll explain why ebook prices have to be high, but it just doesn't make sense, I don't think. They say that otherwise it might cut into the sales of their hardcover books. Well, even though the margin is enormous on a hardcover book, it still costs you, if it's a book you're selling for $25, it still costs you about $3 to produce it, and it still costs you a certain amount to store it and to deliver it and everything else that's connected with it. The ebook, once you've made the first one, costs you absolutely nothing forever. If I had 2 of those products, I'd love to see the ebook cut into the sale of the other, you know. So there are lots of things that are being done very strangely, and as a result of all this, publishers announce, sometimes with great fanfare, that ebook sales are going down now. You've probably seen that in the Times and other places, reports about ebook sales are declining. Well, this is not true. ebook sales are declining for the major publishers who have their books listed at $14.99 and up. But ebook sales from self-publishing writers are going up like that. You know, and the aggregate number of ebooks sold every month increases, the total. So there's a lot about the business that's very strange that way. One thing that's had an effect upon me, I was thinking about this on the way over here, and I was thinking about specifically about that novella I told you about, the guy who gets on the bus. Resume Speed is the title of that. And I was thinking about that because early on, no, I won't say early on, more than 4 or 5 years ago, I'd have either finished that story at 5,000 or 6,000 words tops, or else I'd have realized that I had to find a way to make a 60,000 word novel out of it, because a 21 or 22,000 word novella would be something that I could print up myself and hand out copies to my friends, because there would be no commercial use for it. This is no longer the case. That is now a perfectly fine length. And you see this in other areas too, besides book publishing. You see it in, the way things have changed in TV with what they call both a mini-series and what they call a limited series, which is generally about 12 episodes, or a short season show like House of Cards or any number of shows. And there was an interview just the other day with Juliana Margulies, who was saying that although it took a lot of soul searching, she was still going to be really glad when The Good Wife was done. And someone said, would you do network TV again? You know, and she said, there's not enough money in the world to tempt me to something like that, where you're doing 22 shows a year. She said, no, never. Someone said, well, how about cable, where you just do 12 shows in a season? She said, I'd say yes in a heartbeat. Lots of things are changing all over the place that way. So I've been having a whole lot of fun. I've been republishing all my early work as both ebook and in paperback, which I find easy to do. And let me tell you, it's a slow way to get rich, but I speak as someone who never found a fast way, so I don't really object to that. Also, I've been reprinting recently lots of books that I never thought I'd even admit to having written, let alone enthusiastically republish. I remember for years, I would say, of a lot of my early work, that one of the things that sustained me was the knowledge that it had not been printed on acid-free paper. I figured, Godspeed the acid, you know. And I've changed my mind, and some of that is ego and avarice, certainly. Some of almost everything about me is. But also I profit, I think, from the good example of my friend Robert Silverberg, the science fiction writer, who's always been very open about the the erotic novels that he wrote under pen name in the late 50s, early 60s. And it occurred to me that there's no reason I have to be shy about that. So I've been continuing and going on. And it's exciting. I would not have expected to be this involved in so many aspects of the business at this point. I've gotten into something else too, which has become possible in this world of self-publishing. I I was dismayed that while Germany had been a good market for my books for quite a few years, in recent years, my agent hasn't been able to find a German publisher for any of my books, and there's nothing in print and so on. And I figured the readers may well be there. So I teamed up with a German translator, and instead of paying him a fee and owning it, we're partners in the venture, and he translates, and I publish on Amazon, and if there's ever any income, we'll split it, you know. But this is exciting because there are a couple of books out there. I have a similar deal with a team of sisters from Spain. Actually, they're bilingual from the cradle. They had a Spanish mother and an English father, so they truly grew up with both languages. And they've done a book and are working on another. So it's a very exciting business. And I think, since I clearly have nothing to talk about, I think I would like to take questions and respond, and probably answer them at excessive length. Thank you very much. Before anything else, I want to tell you all that I get out a newsletter by email, a couple times a month generally. And I would be happy to have you on the list. It's free, as you might imagine. God knows it ought to be. And all you have to do is send me an email with Newsletter Hunter as the subject line. And send it, I'll give you the address. It's LAWBLOC, Law Block, no K at the end, LAWBLOC @gmail.com. And that'll get you on the list, and a click on the unsubscribe button will get you off the list if you can't stand it.
What's in it?
Oh, news, what I've got planned, what's on offer, things like that. Sorry? Certainly. LAWBLOC @gmail.com. Sure. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to Gmail. The headline is just put in the header, Newsletter Hunter. Yeah, that'll do it. Yes.
Are any of your books in audiobook?
Are any of my books in audiobook? Most of them are.
Do you do the narrating?
I have, and I used to enjoy doing that, but the last time I did it, it went reasonably well. It was a collection of the Matthew Scudder stories called The Night and the Music, and I did the narration, and by the last day, by the end of each day, the last 2 days, my voice was really falling apart, and I decided, when it was time, for example, I wanted to do an audio book of writing the novel from plot to print to pixel, the book that I held up a few minutes ago. And I self-published that, and there's a handy way to self-publish audiobooks as well through an arm of Amazon, which I'd worked with before. But I decided I would rather team up with a narrator than do it. I started imagining what that was going to be like, and I decided someone else could be me just as easily. Yes?
Did anyone ever want to make Matthew Scudder a TV, like Spencer?
Yeah, no, there have been thoughts of that from time to time. You know, in the whole world. Oh, okay. In the whole world of film and television, somebody will think of doing anything you can imagine at one time or another, but whether anything comes of it is something else. That it took ages for A Walk Among the Tombstones to be a film. That was originally optioned for Scott Frank, I think close to 20 years ago, and it took forever to get made. So periodically someone talks about the possibility of TV, but don't hold your breath.
I'll just have to keep it. I'll just have to keep.
I think so. I think so, yes.
Yeah. What's the title of your new book? The title of your new book? You said you just had finished writing a book.
Oh, the novella that I was talking
No,
about?
one longer than that. It sounded like you wrote something else just recently. No? I misunderstood?
That would have been the writing the novel from plot to print to pixel.
No. All right. I guess I misunderstood you. Sorry.
Well, I want to give you a plug, and then I have a question. The plug is, I looked you up on Amazon when I knew I was coming to this to see what you had that was new, and I downloaded Resume Speed and read it in one sitting and loved it. I'd really recommend
Thank you
it.
so much.
Yeah, and then also I subscribed to the newsletter and really like that too,
Excellent.
so I was happy to find those. My question is, I think it was the character Jack Taylor in Ken Bruin's books.
Yeah.
Yeah, who said that he liked Matt Scudder a lot more before he quit drinking. So do you have comments about Matt Scudder before and after? Or
No,
during
that
drinking and
may
after?
tell us more about either Jack Taylor or Ken Bruin than it does about Matthew Scudder.
Yeah, I think very much Jack Taylor.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's any sort of reflection, Matthew Scudder's stopping drinking and the neighborhood changing. If there's any sort of
Well, you think
interrelationship.
the minute he stopped drinking, some of the bars went out of business.
Maybe one or two, a few favorite haunts, but just a sort of relationship between the character and the community, and that sort of transition for both.
Well, I certainly didn't have that in mind, and I don't think I had it unconsciously in mind either. No. I see what you mean, though. Yeah,
Thank you.
sure. I think you got a hand there. Yes, go ahead.
Do you have any kind of routine, or how do you write? Do you get up at a certain hour and then break? What is your...
Well, it's variable. I usually go away to write. And in fact, I just did recently. For some years, I would often go to a writer's colony, like the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts or Ragdale. And that was, I found that quite congenial. But more recently, I decided that was a little like going to camp, and that maybe I was too old for that. So I often will find some way, though, to seclude myself in a situation that'll work. One time I took a cruise. It was perfect. It was the book that I wrote was The Burglar Who Counted the Spoons, the most recent of the Bernie Rodenbar books. And the way I did it, I knew I wanted to be off by myself, and I thought I found this cruise that left from Boston and returned to Boston 35 days later after going around the North Atlantic, a Holland America cruise. And that was great. I took a train to Boston, I got on a ship, I wrote for 35 days, I got off the ship with a completed book, and I took the train home. It was, couldn't have worked out better, you know, and all my creature needs were taken care of. Sometimes I got off the ship in a port if I was done with the day's writing in time. Other times I just missed that board, but that's all right. One has to prioritize things. And it went very well. Just this past month, and this was a case where this may be instructive as showing the way in which, it's hard to tell what works out and what doesn't. I had a couple of things in mind, and I booked an Airbnb apartment in Jacksonville for 6 weeks. And I didn't know anybody there, which was ideal as far as I was concerned, because I didn't want to have any human contact that I could avoid, except with waiters and things like that. People bringing me food, that was all right. And I set up and I started to work, and I was working on what I thought would be a book. And I got about 18 or 20,000 words into it in a good little over a week working on it. And then I realized that while what I'd written might be something someday, it wasn't something I could go on with now, and it would probably ultimately take very different form, and the best thing to do with it now was to stop writing it. Fortunately, I had a plan B. There was another story I was interested in writing that I thought would probably be novella length, ideally. And I started that, and I wrote about 15,000 words of that, and it was going quite well. And then one day it stopped. And I didn't know how to end it or where to go with it. So I took a day off to think about it. And then I took another day off to think about it. And around the third or fourth day like that, I realized that if I was getting up in the morning and trying to figure out how to play solitaire and do crossword puzzles enough for it to be time to go to sleep again, this was not a productive stay. So I got back on the train and came home and figured that I just wasted, at this point it was about 3.5 weeks, I just wasted that amount of time. And okay. And then it turned out, I thought about the novella, the thing that I got installed on not that far from where it should end. And I thought, well, let me read it over and see if it's all right, at least what I've written. And I read it, and it struck me as okay. And I thought, there's probably a way to finish this. And a day or so later, I figured out what it was, and I did in a couple of days. And it wound up working, and it's going to be published, I think about a week from today or tomorrow, as a Kindle single. And the title is Keller's Fedora. It's in that series. And Subterranean wants to do that as a book as well, the same treatment that they're giving Resume Speed. So that what I thought was a completely wasted stay in Jacksonville turns out to have been productive. It reminds me a little bit of the story. It's not much of a story. Well, I'll tell you the story. There was this little bird in the middle of the winter, and it was, freezing, and the cold really got to it and numbed it and knocked it off its perch, and it fell onto the ground, apparently dead. And a farmer came by, saw the little bird, picked it up to go add it to the compost pile, realized it was still alive. So very carefully took, a fresh pile of cow manure and packed it around the little bird right up to its neck to warm it gradually. And then he walked off and went about his business. And the bird gradually returned to life and to consciousness and sang a happy little bird song, which was heard by the barn cat, who came over and promptly devoured him. Now, that's not all that much of a story, on the surface, except, although, for a simple little story, it has 3 morals. And the first moral is, the person who puts you in the shit is not necessarily your enemy. The second moral is, the person who gets you out of the shit is not necessarily your friend. And finally, when you're up to your neck in it, keep your mouth shut. I've always liked that. Yes?
I find it very interesting that you that you change your location to do your writing. Have you ever thought about why you are not comfortable writing at home?
It's not so much that I'm not comfortable writing at home, because I have done that certainly many, many times over the years. But I find that isolating that way in another location for the specific purpose of writing something facilitates concentration considerably. Yeah.
Have you ever written a memoir, and if not, would you consider it, or have you thought about it?
That's an interesting question. I have, and the answer, I suppose, is yes and no. I was at a writer's colony one time at Ragdale, and I started a book, and it wasn't working. And I realized that the story was there, but I'd have to come back to it another time. But I had the rest of the stay there and ought to do something, I thought. So I decided to do a memoir of my beginnings as a writer. And it was an astonishing experience. I only worked on it for about 7 or 8 days, whatever time I had left there. And I got a tremendous amount of work done. And writing, I found I would be writing about something that I barely remembered. And while writing about it, other doors would suddenly open in the memory to things that I hadn't thought of once since they'd happened. And I was writing at breakneck speed, and it was exhausting. And I did this for about, I think I got around 50,000 words done of what I projected would ultimately be, probably a little over 100, whatever, it was hard to know. And I came home from that trip, and for about 10 days, I would get up in the morning, go lie on the couch until it was time to go back to bed. I was completely depleted, My wife would dust me periodically. And my agent included that in a multi-book deal that I made with a publisher. And they certainly weren't pressing for it. It was only a tiny portion of the advance. But I realized after a while that I didn't want to go back to it. And I repaid the advance and put it away. And since then, I've written a lot of portions of memoir. I told you I was republishing a lot of early books online as e-books, and often as paperbacks as well. And the hardest part of that has been writing the product description for the Amazon page, because in some cases these are books that I haven't read since I wrote them. So I have to read them to find out what they are. And but in the course of that, I've written a lot about the time. So I've, at this point, I really don't think I would ever want to write a memoir formally, because I've done it in chunks and bits and pieces so many times in so many different places that I think I've used it up. But are we out of time?
No, we're not. We could go on all night, but I think it was a nice evening. I think you gave a nice talk. I'd love you to sit down and inscribe some books, and those people who would like you to sign books for them, they can come up and continue any conversation.
Okay, fine.
And there are refreshments in the back. for you or anyone.
Give me a minute. I want to tell people what I brought.
Sure.
Certainly, I'd be delighted to have you by and to sign. I just want to tell you what these are. This is Writing the Novel from Plot to Print to Pixel, which is the book that I just was talking about before. This is a book called The Crime of Our Lives, and it's essays and such, and there's some memoir in here too, as a matter of fact, about 4 chapters about my early days as an editor at a literary agency. But it's about different crime writers, my take on them, my experiences knowing some of them, or as a reader, whatever. This is a book I didn't write, by a friend of mine. It's called Break Writer's Block Now, with an exclamation point, just in case you thought he wasn't serious. And it's a very short book, and it's a terrific book. It works. It's a system that's extremely effective. The reason I'm selling it is that when the book was remaindered, the writer bought the remaindered copies, then found with time that he didn't really have storage space for them. I bought them all from him, and I've been selling it over the years. And this is Telling Lies for Fun and Profit. This is the early edition of that book. That is all. Thank you.